326 BC, the edge of the known world. An army of 60,000 men, veterans who have marched 20,000 miles without losing a single battle, are sitting in the dirt. They are flat out refusing to take one more step. Their king is 30 years old, and he is absolutely livid. He screams, he pleads, he threatens, but the men who have followed him for 11 years just weep. There is a massive disconnect between Alexander and his ranks. These men are exhausted, mortal soldiers, but Alexander genuinely believes he is a god. That absolute, unwavering belief in his own divinity was the psychological engine that drove him to conquer the known world, and it was the delusion that finally broke the greatest army in history. Alexander didn't emerge from the celebrated city-states of Athens or Sparta. He came from Macedonia, a rough, mountainous region in the north that the rest of Greece essentially considered an uncultured backwater. But his father, King Philip II, didn't care about their opinions. Philip spent 2 decades systematically transforming this dismissed territory into a dominant, highly disciplined military superpower. This carving details Philip's master invention, the Macedonian phalanx. The core was the sarissa, a massive 18-foot pike wielded by infantry locking shields. Soldiers 5 rows back could project their spears forward, creating a moving wall of steel. While Philip was building this machine, Alexander's mother, Olympias, was building his ego. From childhood, she whispered a specific story into her son's ear. Philip wasn't his real father. His real father was Zeus. In 336 BC, Philip was assassinated. A 20-year-old Alexander inherited the throne, and immediately proved his ruthlessness by crushing a rebellion and entirely leveling the powerful city of Thebes to the ground. When a man who believes he's a demigod takes command of the world's most advanced military, the result is a uniquely volatile force. Alexander aimed it directly at the Persian Empire. In the spring of 334 BC, Alexander crossed the water into Asia. He was the first to jump off the ships, hurling his spear into the dirt and declaring the continent his by right of conquest before a single sword was swung. He backed up the theater with extreme, almost reckless violence. At the Battle of Granicus, Alexander fought directly in the vanguard. He was nearly killed by a Persian nobleman before one of his officers sliced the attacker's arm off at the shoulder. Surviving these impossibly close calls had a profound effect on his men. When your king charges into the bloodiest part of the fight every single time and walks out without a scratch, people start to think he might actually be protected by the gods. At the Battle of Issus, he targeted the Persian king Darius III directly. Alexander led a devastating cavalry charge straight into the enemy center, forcing Darius to turn his chariot and flee the battlefield entirely. Darius fled in such a panic that he left his own mother, wife, and children behind. Alexander captured them, but instead of executing them, he treated them with royal dignity, signaling to the Persian people that he was their rightful divine ruler. Every impossible victory, every narrow escape, served as experimental proof in Alexander's mud. The universe was confirming his mother's hypothesis. He flatly refused to accept mortal limits. When the island fortress of Tyre blocked his path, Alexander spent months building a half-mile causeway out of rocks and timber right across the open ocean to break their walls. After taking Egypt, he made a grueling pilgrimage deep into the Libyan desert to the remote oracle of Siwa. There, the high priest reportedly greeted him as the literal son of the god Amun. From the moment he walked out of that desert temple, his rhetoric shifted. His divinity was no longer a piece of political theater. It was his absolute reality. He proved it at Gaugamela. Darius had chosen a massive, flat plain specifically designed to let his superior numbers surround and crush the Macedonians. Alexander deliberately opened a gap in his own lines, drew the Persians into chaos, and shattered the Persian Empire. At 25 years old, he had conquered the world's largest empire in just 3 years. For Alexander, the debate was over. He was a living god. But victory introduced a new darkness. At Persepolis, the magnificent ceremonial capital of the Persian kings, a drunken victory banquet ended with the entire palace complex reduced to ash. Historians still argue about whether burning the palace was a calculated political statement to prevent rebellion, or simply the erratic, impulsive mistake of a man slowly losing his grip on reality. The campaign pushed further east into the mountains of Central Asia. The sweeping cavalry charges of the open plains were replaced by brutal, grinding guerrilla warfare in freezing mountain passes that exhausted the men. As the conditions worsened, Alexander's demands escalated. He began requiring proskinesis, a deep, physical bow of submission from his oldest Macedonian friends. To the Persians, this was standard protocol. To the Macedonians, bowing to a man was the gesture of a slave to a master. His most trusted commanders refused, viewing it as the demand of a tyrant. Back in the dust of India, 20,000 miles of marching had exhausted the men's bodies, but their leaders' mounting hubris had finally broken their spirit. Alexander conquered the earth, but he lost his connection to the men who bled for it. The absolute belief in his own divinity that made him a conqueror was the very trait that made him fail as a leader.